AI in Action is brought to you by Alldus International, covering your business's staffing, consulting, and networking needs. Our host brings you the leading minds in AI, sharing their story, their success, and their advice. Focusing on fast-tracking you to the top, AI in Action cuts through the hype to help you kickstart your data science career. To listen to the latest AI in Action podcast, head over to www.alldus.com/podcast or subscribe via iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Podcasts.
Hello, welcome to the AI in Action podcast. I'm your host, Mark Kelly, Chief Customer Officer at Alldus International. In today's show, we're speaking with Nils Lenke. Nils is the VP and General Manager at Apps BU, Cerence. Nils, very welcome to the show today.
Thanks for having me.
Nils, would you give me a little bit of a background about yourself and your journey to now? And then maybe you could tell us a little bit more about Cerence for people that don't actually know much about the company.
Sure, happy to. So I studied computer science and communication research in the 1980s and 90s, actually, because I wanted to do something with computers and communication, or say speech and language and all that. And I did my PhD in AI in 1995. Then right after I joined a company called Philips Dialog Systems, which was a Philips company, obviously, and we built dialog systems using speech recognition for call center automation, stuff like that. And then frankly, I've never switched job really. My company morphed. I got acquired and sold and spun out and renamed, but it's still, I've never really moved away. I've done many things, and now I run a business unit within Cerence, which is now the company, how it's called. And we deal with new revenue share opportunities, new apps that we implement in the car. And then speaking about Cerence a little bit, Cerence got spun out of a larger company that some of you may know called Nuance. We were spun out October 2019, so we are a little over a year old. We are now an independent NASDAQ-listed company with a headquarter in Burlington, close to Boston. And we built AI systems, conversational AI, as we call it, for the mobility space, mostly in automotive. So if you've ever spoken to your car, if you drive a BMW or a Mercedes or a Volkswagen or an Audi or a Ford or a Geely or whatever it might be, there is a very good chance you've spoken to one of our systems. Yeah, so we have put speech and other technologies into more than 300 million cars historically, and last year we shipped roughly 50 million cars, so 1 out of 2 cars shipped has some Cerence technology in it.
What was it like with all those different changes within the company and the culture? And because you've probably wore a lot of different hats throughout your time.
That's right. So I've been in PS and in R&D and in product management and all that, and it's been very exciting because it had always been about letting people interact with machines. But for many years, we called that just machine learning and stuff like that. And then, say, in 2010, 2011, we started using neural networks for doing what we are doing. And today, we're using neural networks, of course, in all our technologies. But back then, we switched it over step by step from hidden Markov models to neural networks and all that. And then it was started to be called AI again, right? I studied AI in the 1990s when it was symbolic AI, and then machine learning was very different. But today it's the same thing. If many people use AI and deep learning nearly as synonyms today, and so the whole field has changed a lot. And also the expectations. I mean, back then it was kind of pioneering to put speech recognition into call centers. But today, people really expect they can speak to their phones, they can speak to the television, they can speak to their cars. Having an interaction with a machine is now really normal and nothing really exotic anymore. And that's really what has changed the whole thing. It's being from pioneering isolated solution to something that's a new normal today.
It's really interesting. If you ever look at how children interact with devices on Google, for example, or YouTube or Alexa, they never try to type anything. They just straight away talk to it. So it's Google, how many elephants are there in the world? Google, how do I set up this computer Alexa, what day is it today? What weather? What time of the weather? So it's so normal for them to actually do this. And when you think about how we approached different situations, uh, it's just completely turned on its head, and it becomes the requirement that people can interact in some regards, and they prefer a consistent approach rather than necessarily another live human on the phone or interacting with them.
That's totally right. And I mean, we've enjoyed that from early on in the automotive space, because their speech makes so much sense, right? You're driving, you should focus on driving, but you still want to do stuff. And in earlier times, it was just operating the navigation system or the radio. Today, people while driving want to stay connected. They want to be in touch with other people through social media. They want to send messages. They want to get information from the internet. They want to purchase stuff, right? We're building things we call smart domains, where you can search for restaurants, search for gas stations, make the purchase. You can play games and all that in your car. And speech is just a natural way of doing that. So that helped us a lot early on. And today, speech, as you say, is everywhere, in the living room and on your phone and everywhere. And you need to make it consistent. It needs to be a consistent experience, and that's what we are building. We are building the speech experience in the car that naturally also integrates third-party assistance elsewhere, but it's still an OEM branded experience. Maybe I should mention that. You may not have heard about Cerence, because what we built it with and for the OEM. So they built an experience in their cars that's powered by Cerence, but it's branded by the OEMs. No?
It's so helpful when you're driving on a relatively long distance to get your emails read out to you, listen to a podcast, listen to a meeting back, send an email, send a text message, an article that you wanted to read, but you haven't got the time. It can actually be read to you. So there's loads of real time savers that can add a lot of impact, and for people having the comfort of a car with Wi-Fi and working, it can be a real game changer.
Absolutely, and we see people actually need this, because it's unsafe to do stuff on your smartphone while driving. And but many people can't live without being connected for an hour or two, and we connect them from the car to their systems at home. We connect them to other systems. We connect them to the internet and to all the information they need. So that's really the whole idea. Yeah.
Niels, so when we look at projects, technology projects, but the vast majority of them fail. Now, when we look at data science, machine learning projects, depending on who you talk to, you're working at around 10% of data science projects will actually make it into production, and the rest failing, quote unquote. And there's a variety of different reasons for that. Why is this?
It's a good question, and let me start by saying it's not true for us. I mean, as I said, we use data science or AI, deep learning, whatever you want to use to name it. We do that as two levels. We do it at the core technology level. So we build speech recognition, we build natural language understanding technology, we build voice synthesis or text to speech, we do voice biometrics, and for all of that, we use neural networks these days. So it's all data driven. And we have done that for so many years that it's for us it's an evolution. We don't sit down and say, hey, do a totally new technology. For us, it's an evolution of things we have done for a long time. And then we do the same at the more conversational level. So you're having a conversation with your car, and the car learns your preferences. I mentioned we do smart domains like finding fuel stations while you're driving. The system will learn that you prefer a brand over the other. And that's, of course, also using AI technologies. And I think the trick here is, and it brings us back to an earlier question, the whole question of saying I have a data science project and now it fails, it's turning it backwards, because you start with data science as a solution and then you look for a problem to solve. But in reality, you should start with a problem, and then data science comes in handy to solve that problem. And then you don't work on the wrong problem, and you don't build something that you need to look then for a problem for. if you start from the problem, you have you need that solution, and it's less likely to fail, in my opinion. You know, as we said before, people need to talk to their cars. There's a need for it, so solve it. That's it. Yeah.
It's really, really important, because if you look at the major challenge, is that the problems that get solved, they're not necessarily that impactful. They don't necessarily move the dial forward. And consequently, morale can drop. Senior decision makers can get frustrated because it doesn't warrant the investment that's there, and it's not something that they're going to become famous for, where word will spread about the value that's added because it's being focused on the wrong problem as well. Talk to me a little bit about data, dirty data, inaccessibility of data, making sure you've got the kind of the roadmap ahead, that you've got a clear and precise way of going on that journey.
Mm-hmm. I think the two questions actually are tied into each other, because if you have a problem to solve, you can't just look at the data science problem. You need to look at the organization around it, at the processes, and also see what are the processes I'm going to change. How is this impacting the overall organization? How does control and data and information flow today, and how will it be in the future? Yeah, I mean, imagine you replace a business system by something that's data driven. Well, you already have data flowing today, and you will have a new flow tomorrow, and it will impact people. It will maybe cost some people their job. It will create new jobs and opportunities for others. It will make jobs more interesting for people. You need to look at the entire picture, and then it becomes evident where you get the data from and who the people are who should help you. Yeah? Tapping into data is very important. Again, for us, it's quite simple. Our technology used to be embedded only in the past. Today, we build hybrid system with a cloud component. So cars are connected these days, and that means a lot of the interaction between the people and the cars, we get logs of that we can use for specific purposes, complying with all the rules like GDPR and all that, of course, for specific purposes. But we have access to that data. But yes, you're right. In other circumstances, it may be a hard job to getting the data in the first place. Again, if you try to steal a job from somebody, they might not be helpful getting you the data you need, right?
Tell me about how the customer experience is changing, and where we see the trends for the years ahead for the future of automotive.
It's a good question, and some trends we're seeing happening already. So one trend is clearly connectivity. So some years ago, there were nearly any connected cars. Today, most cars hitting the road are connected. So telematic services, being connected to the internet, being able to deploy new services in cars. I mean, a car used to be a fairly static object. You would buy a car with a certain infotainment system. It would still be the same after 5 or 6 or 10 years. That's totally different today. You can, you have all the large screens, you have the software running in the head unit, in the infotainment system with speech and other services. And you can update them, right? You can update the cloud service behind, you can over the air update the components in the car and keep the infotainment system fresh. That's what Daimler does. They recently launched the S-Class, and there's Cerence technology in there, and it will not stay the same. They launched MBUX with the A-Class a couple of years ago, and they're updating it all the time. So systems evolve and cars stay fresh. Yeah? So infotainment is clearly in itself a huge trend, because some years ago you would sell a car by looking at horsepower and complicated braking systems and stuff like that. But today, when you're moving to electrical cars so the infotainment component gets a lot more exciting than the technical components inside the car. Yeah? And then finally, people want to stay connected. So they want to understand, is their heating at home working okay? They want to open the garage door while driving home. They want to be connected with friends and family. They want to purchase stuff. Yeah, they may want to order a restaurant in advance, either a table or a pickup in these days before they get there. They want to pay for fuel in a contactless way without having to enter the gas station. So in-car commerce is another trend we see. Yeah.
It's interesting because with COVID, what I've read is that where previously there was a lot of sharing, ride sharing, public transport, people have become more focused on having their own car, a car they own, a personalized version of what they have, their own space that they can have. And that's probably changing mindset a little bit. And with electric, it's becoming okay, very sustainable. So people are actually saying, okay, actually, this is something that won't be harming the environment, and I can have a very personalized service myself in the car that I own.
That's true. So I mean, there's competing trends here. So for environmental reasons and keeping cities also a place you want to live in, there is of course a trend to tokenized shared rides, electrical buses, and by the way, that's something we also deal with. So we showed a nice concept there at last year's CES, where you could interact with an electrical shared bus from the outside and inside by voice and some fancy displaying technology. So we don't only deal with cars, we also deal with two-wheelers, e-scooters, etc. So there is new trends of mobility, but you're absolutely right. COVID has created a counter trend, which is let's get back into my private car. And if you want to do this, because it's safer, and we see this in tourism also. By the way, we're building a product that helps you enjoy visiting a city with your car because it tells you about it. And so that's the trend. But if you want to do this with a good conscience, you may want to acquire an electrical car, an EV, and then you can do it without thinking about the pollution you're creating and the climate crisis. Yeah, you can still do it.
Yeah, it's a really interesting time in the automotive space. It's very, very exciting to see what's happening.
I want to agree. I mean, it's really exciting, the acceleration in innovation, the new players entering the field, what people expect of their cars. I think it's unprecedented how quickly things change in the automotive industry, and this old thinking of let's think in 3, 5, 4-year production cycles no longer exists. So.
I'm Mark Kelly, Chief Customer Officer at Alldus International, and you've been listening to the AI in Action podcast. Our guest today has been Nils Lenke at Cerence, where he's a VP and General Manager Apps BU. You can follow Alldus AI in Action on www.alldus.com podcast, and if you haven't yet, go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. Join us next week for another AI in Action podcast episode. Thank you for listening.
AI in Action is brought to you by Alldus International, covering your business's staffing, consulting, and networking needs. Alldus offer an exec search program. Alldus can help you discover how data science and AI can transform your company. With our unrivaled network of C-suite executives and senior AI professionals, we offer retained search services across the US and Europe. Get the Alldus advantage. Become a member of the Alldus community and enjoy some of the following: AI meetups. Once a month, our community gathers to listen to some of the leading experts in the world of data science and AI. Our speakers come from all over the world, including Dublin, Boston, and Frankfurt. We also have our AI mentors. Our experts will provide mentoring to Alldus members. And don't forget our AI in Action podcast. Each week we have guests from all over the world talking us through their education, career, and more. Become an Alldus member and get the Alldus advantage. For more information and to sign up for our newsletter, log on to www.alldus.com. That's www.alldus.com. Alldus International, empowering through AI.